Okay, folks, this is part 3 of my insane rank on deity ranking and how it should really work. Um, if you've heard the other two, then I'm just going to jump right in. Otherwise, go listen to the other two first and come back here. Um, I'm going to go into some other two first and then jump back to one of the previous ones. Disguise. Disguise is a very easy way for a deity to get worshippers, to get power. Shar has done this at least a dozen times with lesser deities. That after she's killed them, after they've disappeared, she pretends to be them, resurrect either be them straight up or just be them resurrected, and in effect get worshippers to worship her in that form and steal power that way. I believe the last time she did it, she stole the domain of swamps or something of that nature. Amin-Tor may very well have just recently done this with Lothander, i.e. he was pretending to be some guy named Lothander, who was a deity for a long period of time, and then, boom, here's the resurrection of the Morning Lord. For 4th edition has used this in excess, in my opinion, to explain why there's racial deities of various things like love, and whatnot, and still non-racial deities of these same things, and their whole explanation is that these deities are actually the same god, just taking various forms in order to garner worship. It happens. I don't think it happens as much as they'd suggest, but it is a nice convenient way of consolidating a whole lot of deities for 4th edition. Another reason I don't like 4th edition. Moving along. Again, this is a fun way for a higher up deity to steal a servitor deity's portfolios, steal a servitor deity's worship and power if they feel like it. Again, if you're going to be a servitor deity, I suggest you make sure your higher up is trustworthy and isn't willing to just absorb your butt. Born one. This is a fun one. What happens when 2 storm giants have a baby storm giant? Well, that baby storm giant is going to be a storm giant, and he's going to have the powers of a storm giant. If not necessarily the hit die, he'll advance to that point at some point. So what happens when you have 2 deities who start up as, people with powerful hit die and rose to deityship? Well, why can't they have a child? They still have physical form. And their child, being born of 2 deities, should be a god, or at least have the divine spark, if not the worshippers. Now, in my opinion, if you know you're about to have a baby and you've got 9 months to go or a year to go or whatever, why not set up his church? Why not send out pronouncements, proclamations, letting them know that the new god of the sun is going to be born? And hence you have things like Zeus mating with someone and having twin gods, one of the sun, one of the moon. And they're given these titles long before they ever reach maturity, and they're born gods. Why? Well, because people were told that this is what's happening, and they accepted it. I would do the same if I were God and I were having a child. I'd totally want them to be God, and I'd set them up for it. Wouldn't you? You'd set them up for college. So born one is a fun one. Because what happens when the kid decides to rebel at those lovely deity teen years? Now, my favorite one is held office. Gods give themselves titles all the time, but what if there actually is titleship? I.e., what if there is a god of magic, and he is magic, and he is, I should say, better yet, he is a speaker, a mouthpiece for magic. Well, then he doesn't need to really get worshippers now, does he? Now, granted, the added benefit would be fine, a couple of extra ranks here and there, but he is a direct manifestation of a force of nature. This explains elemental deities, deities of fire, deities of water, deities of nature in general. They don't necessarily have to draw worship from worshippers or hit die or anything else. They're just granted the power because the power exists, and it needs someone to manage it. It needs someone to speak up for it before civilization railroads and destroys and industrializes all of nature. This is a fun one too because it allows for things like planes to exist that don't really have deities. For instance, the mounting layers of Celestia. There's 7 layers, there's an Archon in each one, but none of them are gods. You have Zaphakiel, who has 38 dice, a CR like 30 something. He's unimaginably killable, but he's not a god. Now, in my opinion, he should be, but maybe he's just holding a title, something that is a placeholder for power. The same is true of probably Asmodeus in the 9 layers of hell. Now, in his case, he holds a title as King of the 9 Hells. Maybe if one of the other ones kills him, they can take that title, but they're granted the same powers and privileges that he is. So has he really disappeared? No, we just have a new physical entity who's taken the place. Now, this is also fun because let's say you do want to be the god of magic. Well, then you can kill the god of magic and take his office. But the problem is that you are now duty bound with that office. You are now basically, if you can't make your will save, you're going to end up just like the previous god of magic. And if you decide not to take his office, well, then you don't absorb anything. You don't get any of the powers or duties or responsibilities, but magic itself will create a god to take his place. May alter him somewhat for whatever reason to better protect itself from whatever chaos you wrought, but that deity magic will probably exist within just a few weeks of you killing him. It allows for a static pantheon. It allows for deities to be killed without, spell plague to happen. Granted, I imagine if you killed a deity of magic that was holding that title, holding that office, there'd be some disruption. I mean, I can see, islands falling out of the sky for the next 5 minutes, and, adventurers getting really screwed because their wand stopped working. But overall, magic would stay the same, mythos would stay intact, and in 5 minutes nobody would even know what happened. But everything would be fine. You don't have continents shifting and landing on each other and killing everyone, and races disappearing. You don't have succubi jumping from chaotic evil to lawful evil. You don't have crazy things. God, I hate 4th edition.
Stupidest thing ever.
Stupidest thing ever. I don't even understand how they're lawful. But you see, this is what's nice. And what's really interesting is when you have, these gods of these different pantheons fighting, and one of them manages to take the title from another. I mean, what happens when you have the manifested god of nature suddenly killing the manifested god of death? I mean, do you have a god of nature death? Do you have a new god of cycles? Do you have a god who's representing both? It can allow for some interesting combinations. It also provides the players with an easy way to become a god. And unfortunately, at that point, lose themselves, because they're not going to be able to fight off whatever force it is that's making this god appear or act or be in existence. So honestly, if you had a player who killed Zaphakiel at the top of the 7 layers of Mount Celestia, and they took up that mantle, do you really think that they could then be evil? No, it'd be like an ultimate punishment, in fact, because your evil player who killed the Archon would now have to take his place and be the next Archon, and actually be that Archon with all the duties and responsibilities of that office. So players would probably think twice about killing someone like that. Now, in practicality terms, I'd like to go over some of these things and discuss what benefits it gives to the player, what benefits it gives to the Pantheon. The obvious first one is hit die. If a player can start achieving some serious hit die, start achieving those high levels, and start doing amazing things, then why wouldn't commoners who have no idea what's going on around them believe that they are a god? It makes it a lot easier to get worshippers when you can do astounding things and do miracles and that sort of thing. You can easily convince a bunch of commoners that you're a god of archery if you can hit a can from 4 miles away with a bow and arrow and be blindfolded. So obviously hit die has its benefits. And I can't really think of any cons to having more hit die, can you? I can't think of any cons to having more hit die. Always a good thing. Worship. again, there's different ways to get worship. I wouldn't necessarily grant Divine Spark based on having 100 worshippers. I imagine Divine Spark has to come from somewhere else. Just having a bunch of people believe you to be a god straight up doesn't just necessarily raise you. I imagine that there's a higher power even above the gods that would have to say, okay, that. Or I believe you'd have to have a massive amount of worshippers. I mean, you're talking in the 50 to 100,000 range before worship alone can just raise you. You'd have to have some serious hit die. So this prevents those 15th level bards with with amazing leadership skills and charisma and all kinds of items from just sort of sitting there and telling their worshippers to worship them, being raised to deityship, because then everybody would play a bard, and that's just ridiculous, and nobody wants that. Acknowledgement, same sort of stuff with worship. The one thing is, it does provide benefit to those who want to forge alliances with other deities. It does provide benefit to evil deities who continue to tick off good gods, because now you have a church that's expressly discussing in all their sermons and proselytizing that you're evil and you're awful and you're to be avoided, but every time they say your name, they're granting you that little extra bit of power. Of course, the problem with getting a lot of enemies is that you then become a target and people want to destroy you and kill you and stop your clergy from existing. So it's a balancing act, really. Progenation, I discussed briefly the problems with that, and that I believe that at some point it's a law of diminishing returns, so you want to be more careful with that. But of course, it's a very easy way to be raised as a deity, is to just simply create your own race and then go with it. I imagine that would cause some serious epic level spellcasting, but I imagine you can get away with it if you do it right. Servitorship, we discussed some of the pros and cons. I suppose if a player is a faithful enough servant and does amazing things, there's no reason why at the end of a campaign a god wouldn't raise them as a servitor deity, and having them appear in a sequential campaign later on as a lesser god would be interesting, especially if farther down the line the players decide to really establish a church and really go for it. Dude, seriously, knives! Knives are not okay. Oh, dear God. Also, you smell like mint.
I smell like gum. The minty rogue is going to kill you with a knife.
Robin Minty.
Who's Minty?
He's Minty.
How is he robbing him?
He's robbing me.
What did it rob you of? Your urine? That's in your pants now?
I did not piss myself. I'm moving along. Servitorship, we've discussed some of the pros and cons. Absorption. Hell, if you can find a dead god reeling through the astral plane, why not eat him? What could go wrong? What could go wrong? He could totally get stuck in your teeth, but then you can use his fingers as toothpicks.
Can I shoot lightning out of them?
You could totally shoot lightning out of his fingers, yes. But I mean, gods do this all the time, and practically speaking, I imagine that while a player character wouldn't be able to absorb like an 18th ranked deity, why not kill a low level deity and then absorb them when you're level 30? It makes sense. And it's probably a great way to do it, especially if it's a really necessary domain, like a domain of forge, a domain of crafters, a domain that belongs to merchants, and is just, you take up the name, take up the mantle, start pretending to be them. There's no reason why after killing them you wouldn't be able to absorb all their powers. I'm about to run out of time again. Okay, looks like we're going to go on to part 4. I'm stopping it here.